I was in an interesting conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was an introduction by someone on Philips Electronics. And I have an interest because I worked for 13 years in Philips Electronics a long time ago. Yeah. And basically what he said, well, he made a kind of presentation initially about the traditional talent management process. And I have been involved in that also in Philips Electronics and in other companies. And that traditional process generally has to do with something you already outlined. And we have to identify the talent. Often first you have to define it. So what is talent? So that's step one. Then you identify them, and then you develop them, and you're going to use that talent probably on the most strategic projects of the organization. And so you know where the talent is, you have access to them, and you develop them. So he outlined that process, and he said, who would not like to have such a fantastic process? And all the hands in the room, or not all the hands, but many hands in the room went up. He said, we had this in Philips, and it was of no use at all. So we skipped the whole we stopped with that process. Yeah. And I think that was a strong message. And I totally agree with him. Yeah. So that generally the traditional process, which is top down, which is management led, which is starting from the philosophy of a limited group of talent, in a sense. Some people are talent and some people are not talent, and we will define that, and we will develop that for the future. That process costs a lot of time, a lot of effort, and the end results of that process. And I include in that process the whole succession management process. Maybe that's out of your scope. But it's even worse with the whole succession management process. Those processes generally don't lead to the results that you want. So the first thing is that the whole the area, what is good performance, and what type of people do we need in all type of positions in the organization? Generally speaking, that view is not very clear, and it's often based on, let's say, it's not fact-based. So the whole area of, you could say, let's call it people analytics, we can call it for this sake talent analytics, are the things we are doing, are they fact-based? Often not the case. Is it fact-based? So are your analytics good enough to find out what is good performance and what is not good performance in current position, and how do you make it future-proof? Because that's the second element which complicates it. We don't know exactly what the future will look like. So we're all kind of the whole area of workforce planning, which is a little bit related to this subject, because why would you start on a project if you're often working for the future, but we don't know exactly what is needed in the future, what type of characteristics. So those two elements, but we can work a lot more fact-based. So that's one. If I would be in your shoes, I would say, what do we know? What does the data tell us? Is there real are there real characteristics, distinguishing characteristics of top performers in our organizations and maybe in other organizations? The second element is a time issue. Generally, talent management is too much focused on the future and not enough focused on the issues of today. And that's if you go around in organizations, and if you go and talk to, for example, senior management or supervisory boards, and you ask them, we are from HR, what do you think is important? They always say talent management. Yes, they always say talent management. Partly because, well, who is going to say to them, that's the wrong answer? Yeah. So that's a nice answer everybody expects. Talent management, succession management, the workforce of the future. But at the same time, they know it's not super urgent. It's for the future. So immediately most of the time for talent management, the issues are not urgent. So the one other challenge is, for you, I would say, but for HR, to bring it to the issues of today. It's not for the future. It's about the issues of today. And often management in many organizations has great difficulty of dealing with the issues of today. Because, for example, a talent management issue is non-functioning people in management teams. Yeah, there is someone in the management team who is not functioning well, who is blocking the careers of other people. But well, it's difficult to tackle with that. Huh? So dealing with blockers, for example, I take it as an example. That's an urgent talent management issue that should be addressed today. That's not a future issue. That's a today issue. So looking at what are the talent management of today is very important, and then you should be able to act. So it has to do with speed. One element is to do with how can you speed up the process that it becomes more or less now. And that's a difficulty. Yeah? But for example, detection, the classical detection process is very slow. It's not. There's two elements wrong with the detection process. It's too manager oriented. In many organizations, I don't know anything about you, but in many organizations, the process is people go along management and say, who are your talent? They make a list. Already making those lists takes quite some time. Then you have calibration sessions because everybody has to agree, which the question is, why is that necessary? So you lose time with talking to all the managers. You use time with the calibration process. And then in the end, you end up with a list where the question is, what kind of list is it? Because it's often very much based on the scope of the managers who have a limited scope. If you have the right profiles, the right technology, the right characteristics, then with the technology of today, you can find the people at the moment when you need them. Yeah? Today, if you look at tools like, for example, Hiring Solved is an example, but many tools are doing. Hiring Solved, you put a CV of a person that is really kind of your ideal profile, you put it in the machine, and then Hiring Solved will do the detection for you. Especially in company, that's no issue because you have all the CV. They was okay. If you're looking for people who are similar to this person, we will find them. So then your detection becomes very fast and a lot more unbiased than processes of today, because the bias in management detection is very big because they generally, what are they looking for? People who look like them, people they like. People, so there's all kinds of biases in the detection process you don't want. But it has to, and I will stop now but it has to do with speed. So can you bring the talent management of issues of today on the table, and then are you able to act speedily and not slow? So, and of course, in the end, you want to be able to detect people in a way. Not only detect them, because one other way to speed up the process is to make it a lot more transparent and open. Because why would you say, well, we determine a group of people? That's a very paternalistic top-down approach. And that is slowly going away. The top-down approach does not work anymore. You need to find a way to be more transparent and open, and so that's simple things. But like say, if there are opportunities, make them open, and then ask people to come forward, and then you have and then it becomes a classical selection process. And also, last remark in this is that often the scope is far too limited. Many organizations still are saying we need to attract and retain the talent, and it's better if you are from inside than if you are from outside. Well, that's a disputable question. At least it's not fact-based. Are people from inside better than outside? Well, there's not a lot of evidence that is really true. So you need also talent from outside. And how are you going to attract those people? How are you going to and most detection mechanisms are very inward looking. We are looking at the people we have already in the organization. Well, there's a lot of talent outside that is often better than people who you have inside. And why would you not take them into account? But I think performance management should be clear, has too many purposes in one process. And the most important process is, in a sense, from my perspective, is how there's two processes. One is, you could say, performance management in the classical sense. That is, yeah, we want to deploy goals. We want to do things, and we must make sure that together we accomplish that. So that's more has to do with goal setting. It has to do with sharing goals in the organization. A good process many organizations use there today is OKR. I'm sure you know it or you already use it. It's objectives and key results. That's one. That has to do with goal deployment and how do we together make sure that we do what needs to be done. The second has to do with how can we help people to become better. So that's more a developmental purpose. Yeah. How can we help people to become better? There, the traditional processes are not good because often they are too much management focused, and again, management is not very good, generally speaking, in giving concrete feedback and helping people to become better. So that's it's a lot of discussions at the same time. But if I say, many organizations are too much saying our men are too paternalistic and making all long lists of what managers should do. Always on that list is our managers should be good coaches and mentors. The reality is 80% of the managers are not. So we should find other ways. We should find other ways to do that. But that's a very important process. But there, what you see as a trend, that is becoming more disconnected from the organization. Because if you want to help people to become better, well, the question is, who are the best people to do that? And often the trust, because the trust level is not high enough and the people are not good enough to do that. So what you already see, not necessarily in organizations, but outside, but I'm sure it will come also in organizations, that you get a disconnect. And like football players today, top football players, they are hiring companies to help them to become better outside the club. And there are companies like Your Tactical Analyst. They are hired by top football players. And they are there for you. I'm Tom, the good football player. I hire that company. They are helping me. And the clubs, Deutsche Telekom or Bayern München or Roma, they don't like it. Because, of course, there is a little bit of conflict. But the players say, the interests are not aligned. The club wants me to play and to become champion this year. My interests are to become the best football player in the world and not necessarily in this club. So help me. And there you see the disconnect. Now, football is, of course, you say, can this be transponded to organizations? It will come. It will come. It has, and organizations that provide that as a service, development as a service, I think that is going to be very important. But the traditional performance management process of saying we rate people on performance, and then ideally for your talent management process also on potential, and then you get the famous 9 grid. Yeah, I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, get rid of the 9 grid, because also that's typically a useless instrument. Because it's one based on performance ratings, which are not so clear what is good performance and not. And it's based on potential ratings, which are often very subjective and very management oriented. And well, and most of the time, there's no real evidence that those processes work very well. So I would say, but that's a long answer, but so the performance management process needs, and that's happening, but it needs to be really disentangled, not too many goals of that process together. But often the criteria for the jobs, yeah, they are also not fact-based. So we ask a lot of people: 10 years experience, multi-country experience, multi-function experience. Well, you know all those lists. Whether that is really necessary, big question mark. Big question. So it has also to do with another super important trend, and that is individualization, personalization. It's not one size fits all. It's not. So it's fact-based, and yeah, one talent is not the other talent. And so take also more into account what people want and what they want to do. A good selection process in all cases is very important, especially if it can be based on the relevant criteria. Yeah. And that doesn't make a difference whether you take people from inside or outside. But today, the movements in the selection process are a lot more looking at, you could say, personality. It's looking at personality. It's of course looking at certain set of capabilities, and it's looking at the cultural fit. So, but the personality is increasingly important because you want people with a kind of future-proof personality. So that selection process is very important. But even if you don't use sophisticated methods, it's important to have it in a very to avoid bias in the process. And that's why you need standardization. You need instruments to do that. But otherwise, it becomes too biased. Now, I think that if you often today, the criteria are too, I already said it, the question is, are the criteria really tested and proven criteria, or are they made up? If you ask management, what are you looking for? Yeah, they make a list. We have all done that. But are those really the relevant criteria? Big question mark. So if it's really evidence-based, yeah, then it becomes more difficult to get away from it. And of course, managers are always, managers are opportunistic, in the sense they need someone today, so they are willing. And what you see in companies is always, but I'm sure you know the example, Google is a good example. Google has no sophisticated, not a very sophisticated or high-tech selection process, but they have done it in a very standardized way. So the selection process in Google is, you have 4 interviews, you have 4 structured interviews. These are the questions you are going to ask, not other questions. Then you have to write down your interview results on a form. You have to score the applicant, and then you give the form with the answers without a score to someone else who scores it again. And says, well, and then you discuss the differences. You say, I don't see evidence for your high score. Maybe she or he looked very nice, but I don't see evidence in the answer. So they have structured interviews, they have checked it, and they say hiring is a high-level decision. So the hiring is not done at low level in the organization. The hiring is so important that in the end, the top people in the organizations, they make the hiring decision looking at the evidence that is on the table. And that's a good example of Google, where they do it consistently in a structured way, and not because if you put the hiring decision too low in the organization, then you get the opportunistic behavior because you need someone today, you lower the threshold, you don't use the right criteria, etc., etc. So there are good examples where the big question is the evidence there. That is, but also what Google, again, it's a Google example, but if you use the analytics in a good way, that what Google also is doing, I like that, is look at recruiter not reliability, but recruiter quality or interviewer quality. So they look at, okay, who predicted, Tom was hired, he was interviewed by 8 people, it's 2 times 4 people in the process, who predicted best the performance of Tom's future. And they take that they close the loop. They say, okay, well, here's Bob, and Bob generally has apparently a better view than other people. So we don't know exactly what it is, but we'll take Bob's result more into account, and we'll remove some of the poor recruiters out of the process. Another element has to do with development. It's a totally different discussion. But how do you develop persons? Well, that's a super open door. But generally speaking, that is done best on the job and not off the job in management training and management courses and those type of things. So, and that's also where many companies have wasted a lot of money because it's offline, it's not individualized, and the effects are not measured anyway. So, and generally everybody is happy because, yeah, of course it's nice to go on a 1 week, 2 week program and meet nice people, etc., etc. But the question is, how can you help people on the job to do their work better? And that's a difficult area. I think also here it has a little bit to do with individualization. So I don't want to generalize. So there are people who are very good at it, yeah, and some people are not so good at it. Now, the old approach in HR is everybody should be good, and we will help you with training, and we will help you with the process. That's the typical HR approach, and the process is a form. You have to talk to your people 2 times per year, 4 times per year. These are the discussion points. We have all done it. Yes, that irritates people, not only employees and leaders. Yeah. So in big organizations, some big organizations, I can't mention names, but also German organizations, they are getting rid of that because the irritation gets so high that managers and employees say to HR, you have promised us that by introducing, and I'm sure you have SAP or Workday, probably SAP, that you promised us that by investing a lot of money in the system, our life would become easier. The reality is it has not happened. Our life had become more irritating. I come behind my computer in the morning, ping, Tom, time for your review with Sebastian. Ping, we warned you yesterday. This is your last. I want to do my job. Yes. So those organizations, they have projects, and the big organizations, projects like give me my time back. And they say to HR, we want our time back. Don't waste my time. So one, it has to do with individualization. Some people are very good at it. So use people on those areas where they are very good. Yeah. So the people who are good in coaching and mentoring and helping, well, give them more of that type of work. So that's one element. Another element is that's a little bit back to HR. HR has pushed away that role as well, saying, yeah, we are HR, we are just advisors, but the managers have to do it. Well, maybe not. So in the whole area of performance consulting, there might be HR people who are very good at that. And I see that emerging, especially also in smaller companies, but also there's 2 companies as an example. One, the traditional consulting companies. They do this by nature. They say, well, we have partners, client-facing partners, and those partners bring in the work, blah, blah, blah. Well, their task is to get the work done, yeah, and to build teams to get the work done. But we have other partners, or maybe not partners, but sometimes they're partners as well. The resource partners, they focus on making sure the people are there, making sure the people are developing. So they split the roles. And the partners who are the client partners, well, they are pushing the people very hard. Maybe they're not so friendly. Maybe they're not so focused on the development, but they get the work done. And the other partners are looking at the individuals and coaching them and helping them. In smaller companies, startups, scale-ups, I see this happening at this moment as well. In scale-ups, let's say companies 500-600 people, many of them are working with self-managed teams. I'm sure you are experimenting and working on that as well, the whole agile wave. So also when you have agile teams, yeah, generally you have a couple of roles. Of course, there you have no leaders. So that already say who is the boss? Well, there is no boss in such a team. You have roles, and people can have different roles in different teams. One role generally is the kind of the agile coach. That's just someone who makes sure that you stick to the rules, stick to the agile rules, or whatever rules you use. Yeah, that's important. But generally, those people don't come from HR. Sometimes they come from HR, but they come from all kinds of areas. And then there's another role that is the more the individual development role. That's people, the go-to person say, okay, yeah, I'm stuck in this team, or I want to develop other areas, or what can I do? That's the individual performance consulting or performance coaching. Often those people in those companies don't come from inside, but they come from outside. So they hire outside capacity. And then it's back to those people are there for the individuals. They are not there for the organization. They are there for the individuals. And that also raises the level of trust, because the moment that I'm the coach of someone, but I'm from the organization, and I go back, say, oh, yeah, I've talked to Tom, but he's not happy, or he's not developing. So you see that splitting. So let people do the things that they are good at, and don't force people to do things which they don't like and are not good at. So it's differentiation, individualization, using people on their strengths, instead of one size fits all. And with respect to leadership, often it's too much one size fits all. I understand this is a big issue. Yeah, so it's a big issue. For many professions, we don't know exactly what good looks like. But so today you see it starting and that's understandable, in the professions where it's relatively easy. Yeah? So for example, it's always relatively, but for example, call center, people in a call center, there it's easier. Because let's say the basic KPIs for people in a call center are twofold. One is how many calls do you process per hour, and what is the net promoter score of. So if you know 3 variables, process how many calls per hour, net promoter score of the client, and how long are they staying? Are they staying longer than a year? Let's say, take that. Because if you like people to stay in a call center, the turnover is often high. You know those 3 variables, then you can start connecting to other data and say, is this group, let's say 30% of your call center falls in this group, high number of calls, high NPS, and staying longer than 1 year. What are the distinguishing factors? How are they different from the other group? Yes, that's analysis you can do, and then you will find, some things you would already expect, and maybe also some things you don't expect. For example, we know that distance home to work in the call center is an important variable. People who live close to the call center stay longer. Yeah. So, but you better take that so you get a mix of criteria, and then you can look for people who fit those criteria the best. So in a call center, it's relatively easy, but still often not done, surprisingly. Yeah. So it's relatively easy, but many call centers are not doing it. And they just hire anybody who says, okay, do you want to work here? They say, okay, yeah, we're desperate, come in. But in software development, it's also a little bit easier. You know how much lines and how efficient a coder, a developer writes code. Yeah. So now you can, but for HR professionals, let's take your group, it's not so easy. Yeah. What is good performance? But we have to think about it. So if we don't have hard data, then we can go to softer data. Like I don't know whether you mentioned it, but I think you mentioned it. It's about client happiness, or they also, it's a Google example, but it's a good example. And there they did the research with they did exactly this research based on who are the top rated managers. It's more managers than leaders in our organization, and where are they different from the rest? And they made a list. I think it's you can easily find it. It's the Google 8, I think it's called. And what are typical differentiating behaviors? So you can, if you're with some hypothesis, with some, and you can, so if you can add financial data to the mix, but you have to be very careful in a sense, because we know that some markets are easier than other markets, and so it becomes, you have to be intelligent, but and not stupid. So it's not. That's the whole discussion about using AI, and we should not give it to the machine and say, okay, well, you determine. But if you with your team develop certain hypotheses, test them with the data, then you're able to develop that. Say, well, what are the characteristics? That would be an interesting question. What are the really distinguishing characteristics of the top 20% high-performing leaders in Deutsche Telekom? Then the first question is, okay, what is high performing? But I'm sure you can come up with something that's financial performance, but also people data. Where are people staying longer? Who are able to attract the talent? Those 20%, what are the differentiating characteristics? Sense, you could say, well, I would be quite happy if you already, if it was based on past performance, it's a lot better than if it's based on no facts. So it's, so it's an evolution. The first is it's biased and based on gut feel and assumptions. The second is, okay, let's try to find out what we learn from the facts. Yes. And then it's absolutely to your, then it becomes kind of intelligent design. Yeah. But it also, if you look at the personality, let's go back to how we can find the top 20%, the top leaders of today, and we can find some common personality traits, some important personality traits. And then the question is, well, are they only, is that personality only good for the past, or is it only good, also good for the future? So you come to the future-proof element. We know if you look at that there are lists, and I'm sure you have them. I think the World Economic Forum publishes that every year. But it's, what are the typical future-proof capabilities? Where are men, women? Where are we able to differentiate ourselves from the machine? So you can add that to the mix. So I'm with you. Let's not only focus on the past. Let's use on the future as well. So, but and I also agree with your summary in the sense it's all about clever recruitment, timely recruitment, fast recruitment, and not developing too far in the future, because that doesn't make sense. So you need people who are able to adapt on the go. In order, what we did not touch, but I just want to mention it, is the team element. So often the process is too much focused on individuals and not enough on how do we create winning teams. And that's a factor which is also very important. How can you create winning teams? Creating winning teams at the moment that you need them, and often in top teams that's an issue. Many top teams are not high performing teams. And another last remark you can ask about the illusion of control is also often an illusion. So you might say, well, what if we don't do anything, or what if we don't do the minimum? Often that's not a bad perspective. Generally, a lot of things go kind of, go with the flow. Some things go automatically. So over designing, there's often a tendency to over design. So it's two elements to my answer. The way you describe it, I already am not totally comfortable. Because you describe, we have find a way to identify the talent and put them in the box. Mm-hmm. So I think that is not necessary. You understand? Because it's only necessary when you need them. Yeah. So if you do it just in time, then it's back to the former question person. If you are able to fill vacancies or positions timely when you need it without having this huge database, it's a lot better. Because that data, that's a fluid set. So you can lose a lot of time by filling filling the pool. Why would you do that? Yeah. So also the pool is maybe, well, at least you can differentiate, because at least you can differentiate, because of course for some, if you find it's very difficult to timely recruit just in time, then you have to start thinking about, do we have a good view on the pool? But for example, take so especially in technical, more in technical than in leadership type of area, that's more important, because often the development of technological capabilities and skills, that takes time. You can't have to become a top specialist in a certain technological area, that takes time. But also sometimes for top marketing area, if you really need people who know markets inside out and out. But you can different for HR, to be honest, you don't need any succession management, pool management, because you're able to find HR people on the go immediately. So why would you have a very complicated process for that? Yeah, and most of you will have come from out, and most of the time they come from outside as well. So some come from inside, some come. Often the areas, the difficult areas are more in the technological, in the technological digital area than in general management area and in marketing. So differentiate. So that's one answer, is the pool is not the pool of talent. Do the minimum that is necessary.